The desert air at Nellis carried a thin chill that morning, but inside the simulator hall the air was recycled and flat. Rows of projectors cast pale grids across the walls, their hum filling the silence where voices should have been. Lana Hale sat alone, at her console, coffee mug, balanced near her elbow. The rim chipped from a fall, months ago. She did not notice the taste anymore. Her job had become routine watch cadets, fly programmed missions, record errors, and offer corrections that were rarely taken seriously. The title of instructor was respectable enough, but it felt like a cage. She had once lived in the sky, and now she lived in the shadows of fluorescent light. Her locker at the far end of the hall held almost nothing personal. A faded squadron patch hung on the inside of the door, its threads fraying where the stitching had rubbed against years of flight suits. She left it there as a quiet reminder, not for display, but for herself. Some mornings she touched it before stepping into the hall, remembering the family that patch had once meant, the call signs of people who were not here anymore. She had never removed them from her notebook. The names and numbers remained, written in steady hand, each curve and margin marked like a prayer. The younger pilots treated her with a mixture of politeness and dismissal. They joked near the vending machines, sometimes letting the laughter carry into the simulator bay. Lana heard them call her Shrike the overthinker, though never to her face. They believed she could not hear, or perhaps that she would not care. She responded with silence. To argue with them would only feed their certainty. Silence was the armor she had learned to wear, though it weighed as heavily as steel. That morning the terminal at her station flickered with a secure alert. A line of data scrolled in pale green text, the kind of signal most analysts brushed off. An anomalous spike, irregular frequency, labeled noise. Lana leaned closer, her finger tracing the curve on the screen as if it were ink on paper. The shape was familiar, too precise to be dismissed. She remembered nights years ago when she had sketched nearly identical curves in her notebook while her squadron laughed at bad coffee and waited for orders. Those curves had preceded an ambush that no one had ever explained. The projector hum seemed louder as she studied the signal. She opened her notebook, pages soft from years of use, and set it beside the screen. Pen strokes from long ago matched the digital line almost perfectly. Her chest tightened with recognition. She looked around the room, but no one else noticed. A pair of cadets were trading stories in low voices near the doorway. Another instructor scrolled idly on his phone, uninterested in the data feed. She tried the comms line, raising the anomaly, but the voice that answered dismissed it with weary finality. The feed is cluttered this week. Just noise. Focus on training. She closed the channel without reply, her jaw tight. She returned to the signal, letting the silence settle again. The hangar beyond the simulator doors groaned as mechanics moved equipment. Metal echoed against concrete. Outside, the desert sun was climbing, flooding the base with relentless light. Inside, Lana remained hunched over her notebook, pen resting against the page. She had been told to ignore it, yet the pattern refused to release her. She touched the frayed squadron patch in her locker before leaving the hall, as if drawing strength from the memory stitched into it. The bond of her lost family was still there, written in every curve she had traced, in every name she refused to erase. The alert had been labeled noise, but she knew better. Beneath noise there was always a pattern, and sometimes the quietest observer was the only one who saw it. The archive room was never meant for comfort. It smelled faintly of dust and ozone, and the steady drone of the air vents never changed, day or night. Rows of monitors lined the walls, some flickering with static as old machines fought to keep their displays alive. Lana Hale sat alone at a corner terminal, the glow of green text reflecting in her eyes. Outside, the base had settled into silence, but she was still here, turning over patterns that no one else cared to see. Her thermos sat beside the keyboard, half drained, the coffee inside gone bitter hours ago. She did not notice the taste anymore. The signal she had flagged earlier kept pulling her back, whispering from the edges of the data stream. With each line of telemetry, she compared. She thought of another night, years before, when her squadron had been sent into an ambush. No one had explained the failure. Official reports spoke of weather, of interference, of bad luck. Yet she remembered the curve of the radar returns, the rhythm that had kept her awake long after the mission ended. Her notebook lay open beside the terminal. The paper softened with age. 4 names were circled in red ink. The men and women who never came home. The circles had bled through the pages over time, dark stains pressing into the sheet beneath. She ran her finger over them, not to reopen grief, but to remind herself why she still searched. Every time she opened the notebook, the memory was there, the laughter in the ready room, the way they teased her for drawing telemetry by hand, the sudden silence when their aircraft vanished into static. A flicker of fluorescent light from the empty hangar beyond cast shifting shadows across the floor. Lana barely looked up. The terminal's glow was all that mattered. She matched the anomaly against her old sketches, each stroke drawn in quiet nights when the rest of the squadron slept. The shapes aligned too closely to dismiss. The signal was not random noise. It carried the same signature that had swallowed her friends years ago. In the daytime, she endured the jokes. Pilots in their 20s smirked when she walked past, calling her Shrike the overthinker under their breath. They believed she lived too much in the past, clinging to ghosts that no longer mattered. She never answered them. She carried the name without protest, because to protest would suggest their words still had power. What mattered was not what they thought of her, but what she still saw when no one else was looking. Her pen scratched softly across a fresh page as she drew the anomaly again, marking the angles with precision. The ink left a scarlet trail that reminded her of blood. Though she quickly pushed the thought away, she wrote coordinates in the margin, careful and exact, each number a defiance against forgetting. The hum of the air vents filled the silence. Lana leaned back for a moment, closing her eyes, and the flashback returned unbidden. The sudden burst of static in her headset, the shouted warnings cut short, the quiet that followed. 4 call signs erased from the record, but never from her pages. The institution had moved on, burying the memory in sealed files, but she had carried it forward in ink that could not be erased. When she opened her eyes again, the anomaly was still there, pulsing steadily across the monitor. She tapped her pen against the notebook once, steadying herself. She knew the others would dismiss her again, but doubt was not weakness. Doubt was persistence. Doubt was the reason she had survived when so many others had not. Lana Hale carried the folder against her side as though it contained something fragile. The pages inside were marked with curves she had drawn by hand, each line a patient reconstruction of the anomaly no one else had cared to see. She walked into the command building knowing it would be an uphill fight, but she believed evidence mattered. The glass doors hissed shut behind her, sealing out the desert air. Inside, the corridors smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. Colonel Maddox waited at the end of a narrow hallway, flanked by aides who avoided meeting her eyes. His expression was unreadable, but his voice clipped the moment she spoke. "Present your concern, Major, and be quick." She spread her notes across the polished surface of the conference table, the projector light shifting faintly across his ribbons. She explained the anomaly, her voice steady, pointing out the precise echo pattern that matched past ambushes. For a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. Then Maddox closed the folder with deliberate care and pushed it back toward her. The words were calm but carried an edge that cut deeper than shouting. "This is noise. Major, you are overreaching." He signaled to an aide, who slid a sealed folder across the table, stamped with the word "classified" in stark black. The aide retrieved Lana's badge before she could protest. It would not be returned. As she tried to argue, the briefing doors opened behind her and a stream of officers entered, their chatter low and purposeful. She stepped aside, realizing this was the classified session she had been excluded from. The projector whirred to life, casting maps across the wall. From her position near the doorway, she caught a glimpse of the anomaly curve displayed in bright red, exactly as she had drawn it. Her suspicion confirmed. Yet she stood outside the circle, a spectator, in a hall where she had once belonged. The doors shut in her face with a hollow finality. The voices within dropped to murmurs. She lingered for a moment, the weight of her unacknowledged work pressing into her chest, then turned away. The hallway lights hummed overhead. A pair of younger officers passed by, whispering, glancing at her with the faint smirk reserved for someone marked unstable. She heard one of them repeat the nickname, Shrike the Overthinker, and the words clung like burrs. She pressed the folder against her chest, but the papers inside felt suddenly heavy, as though their value had been stripped the moment the doors closed. The system had taken her work, confirmed its relevance, and erased her from the frame. She remembered the call sign board inside the briefing room, where her name had once been listed among active pilots. It had been removed, replaced by blank space. Erasure was cleaner than confrontation. In the quiet of the corridor, she stopped at a side table where unused folders were stacked. She left her notebook closed on the top, knowing no one would read it, yet unable to carry it any farther in that moment. The surface of the cover bore faint grooves from years of red pen. Names circled until the paper thinned. She traced one line with her fingertip before stepping away. The message was unmistakable. Truth was a liability, and liabilities were to be managed. Lana Hale had given the system what it needed, and in return the system had taken her place, silencing her with the efficiency of a locked door. The reassignment came without ceremony. Lana Hale was summoned to a small office, handed a sheet of paper, and told her cockpit clearance had been revoked. The explanation was vague, couched in words like reassessment and suitability. When she pressed for clarity, the officer avoided her gaze and reminded her she still had a place in the system, just not the one she wanted. Her new duties were administrative, the kind given to anyone the command wished to sideline without making noise. Her badge still hung from her uniform, clipped neatly, but when she tried to swipe it at the restricted doors, the light blinked red. The gesture became routine, more habit than hope, a reminder of the space she no longer belonged to. The silence that followed, each failed attempt pressed heavier than any reprimand. Days blurred into evenings filled with numbers and files, but her real work happened in the shadows. She slipped into the hangar after hours, when the floor was empty and the only light came from a single bulb humming overhead. Oil stains darkened the concrete beneath her boots. The turbines in the distance throbbed like a heartbeat that never ceased. She spread her papers on a workbench and bent over them with her red pen, tracing curves again and again until they pressed into the sheet beneath. Her persistence might have gone unnoticed if not for one quiet ally. A young tech sergeant passed her once in the corridor, his eyes meeting hers only briefly. The next evening she found a folded packet on her desk, acoustic logs no longer in circulation. He never explained how he'd obtained them. He left them without a word, and she accepted them the same way. Some truths could not survive conversation, only action. She studied the logs under the flicker of the hangar light, aligning them with her hand-drawn curves. The patterns repeated with uncanny precision, confirming what her memory had insisted. The name surfaced in the margins almost by instinct, her pen scratching it before she consciously formed the thought. Chimera. The letters stood out stark against the red ink, a mark of something that was not supposed to exist anymore. The nights stretched long, filled with the sound of her pen moving across paper, the echo of her own breathing, and the distant thrum of machinery. She worked alone, but not aimlessly. Each curve she redrew carried the weight of the names circled in her notebook. The system had erased their story from the record, but her handwriting kept it alive. Sometimes she paused and looked at the folded logs left by the sergeant, untouched by official stamp or archive seal. They felt more real than anything projected on a briefing screen. She kept them close, stacked neatly beside her sketches, the fragile paper evidence that her memory had not betrayed her. The loneliness was constant, but she had long ago learned to live inside it. She no longer expected recognition. The act of tracing, of preserving, was its own form of resistance. In silence, she endured, piecing together fragments the system wanted forgotten. When she finally pushed her papers aside, her fingers smudged with ink, she leaned back and looked at the word chimera written in the margin. The letters glowed faintly in the dim light, as if daring her to keep going. She did not smile, but she felt a spark of certainty. The truth had not disappeared. It was simply waiting in the shadows with her. The breach came without warning, radar screens lit with erratic returns, the sweep tracing jagged arcs that made no sense to the junior operators on duty. Their voices overlapped in confusion, reports breaking into static as the comms distorted. Offshore, a civilian vessel was already calling distress, its coordinates flashing red across the board. Command's response was slow, voices circling in argument instead of action. Lana Hale stood in the corner of the operations room, officially present only as an observer. She watched the hesitation stretch into paralysis, her hand tightening on the edge of the console. The blurred silhouettes on sonar shifted closer to the vessel, shapes too deliberate to dismiss as weather. She leaned over, eyes narrowing, the curve of the anomaly unmistakable. It was the same pattern she had traced night after night in the hangar. The operators froze, waiting for clearance that did not come. Command debated rules of engagement, their voices flat with caution. Lana reached for the spare headset lying abandoned on the console. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the mic to her lips. Not from fear, but from the weight of choice. She knew what disobedience would cost, but she also knew what silence would destroy. Her voice cut through the channel with steady clarity. Redirect fighters to grid 27 north, 31 east. Confirm pattern chimera. Her old call sign followed, spoken without hesitation. Shrike transmitting. The room fell into stunned silence. She heard the hesitation crackle back through the comms. Then the first pilot responded, "Copy, Shrike," adjusting course. The log screen confirmed her intrusion. Her call sign appeared in green letters, typed into the system as if a ghost had stepped out of the past. She pressed the mic closer, issuing concise vectors, each command drawn from memory and the curves she had carried in her notebook. The operators stared, unsure whether to stop her or obey. The civilian vessel's signal faltered, alarms shrieking in the background, then steadied as the fighters closed in. On the radar, the anomaly shifted, trying to slip away. Lana's voice remained calm, directing the intercept like she had done 100 times in training. Her headset quivered in her hand, but her words did not. The fighters locked on, their acknowledgments crisp, no longer questioning. A bright return flared on the scope, enemy platform exposed, then scattered into silence as the threat dissolved. The vessel's distress beacon cleared, a flat tone replacing the frantic pulse. Only then did she lower the mic, breath leaving her in a controlled exhale. Around her, the room remained frozen. No one moved, no one spoke, until a junior operator whispered the words half in awe, half in disbelief. "Shrike is alive." Lana set the headset back on the console, her hand steady now. Her call sign glowed on the system log, undeniable, unapproved, and irrevocable. The silence of command had nearly cost lives, but her defiance had filled the gap. The ghost they had tried to bury had returned, not with fanfare, but with the precision of a voice refusing to be erased. The tribunal chamber was built to intimidate. Its walls were paneled in dark wood polished until they reflected the overhead lights. A long table stretched across the center, screens mounted behind it replaying radar footage from the breach. Lana Hale was seated opposite, her uniform plain, her posture upright. Colonel Maddox occupied the central chair, his ribbons gleaming under the harsh light. His voice carried across the room, sharp and deliberate, each word intended to frame her as reckless. He accused her of bypassing protocol, of endangering assets, of undermining the chain of command. Each sentence landed with the weight of authority. Other officials nodded along, their pens moving quietly against notepads, already writing the record before she had spoken. Behind them, the footage repeated, the anomaly flaring in red as her call sign flickered onto the log screen. Shrike. Lana waited until the room stilled, then placed a sealed logbook on the table. Its cover was worn, edges softened by years of use. She opened it carefully, turning to the page where her red pen had traced the anomaly long before the breach. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she spoke with the calm precision of someone who had nothing left to lose. The pattern you dismissed as noise was written here years ago. 4 names circled, 4 lives erased from the record. You buried the truth, but it carried forward. Maddox's jaw tightened, his voice rising as he dismissed her words as coincidence, imagination, obsession. Yet the more he pressed, the more the younger officers shifted in their seats. Their eyes moved from the logbook to the projected radar clip, then back to her. Recognition stirred. They had flown under her instructions, taken her corrections in simulators. They remembered the nickname Shrike the Overthinker. Now they saw it in a different light. The tension thickened as she leaned forward, her fingertip pressing against the projected curve. This is not instability. This is evidence. Silence nearly cost lives, and only presence saved them. Her tone was measured, not defiant, but it cut through Maddox's bluster with the weight of undeniable truth. For a moment no one spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught between authority and evidence. Maddox tried to recover, insisting she had overstepped. That order mattered more than instinct. Yet his voice no longer carried the same certainty. His authority faltered under the glow of the call sign still visible on the screen. The younger officers exchanged glances, the realization settling over them like a tide. Shrike was not a ghost. She was sitting in front of them, calm and unflinching. Lana closed the logbook gently, as though sealing the names inside once more. She did not declare victory. She did not need to. The record they had tried to erase was already written in a place they could not touch the memory of those now watching her in silence. Knowing the truth had stepped back into the room. The article appeared on the base bulletin board 2 days after the breach. It was clipped neatly from a regional paper. The headline plain, "Routine Interception Averts Threat Offshore." No names were listed, no call signs mentioned, no suggestion of the chaos that had nearly consumed a civilian vessel. Lana Hale stood before it in silence, reading the words twice, then stepping back. The story was tidy, stripped of conflict, written as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. She did not expect her name to be there, but the blunt absence still carried its own weight. Her locker was easy to empty. She had never kept much inside. A pair of gloves, her chipped coffee mug, a few folders of simulator notes. The only thing that mattered was the faded squadron patch hanging on the inside of the door. She folded it carefully and placed it in her notebook before closing the locker for the last time. The clang of the metal door echoed down the hallway, too loud in the emptiness of the moment. She was summoned to an office that smelled faintly of polished wood and stale air. The officer waiting there did not meet her eyes as he delivered the message. Your service record remains intact. There will be no dishonor, no charges, but your career is concluded. You will not fly again. The words were recited like lines from a script. When he finished, he reached for the next folder on his desk, already moving on. Lana nodded once and left without reply. Her boots struck the hallway tile in steady rhythm. Each step felt like walking deeper into silence. No one stopped her. No one even looked up. By the time she reached the outer door, the sound of her footsteps seemed to vanish into the vast quiet of the base. She carried her notebook under her arm, its weight heavier than anything she had been handed in that sterile office. That evening, seated alone in the dim light of her quarters, she opened the notebook once more. The 4 names were still circled in red ink, the lines pressed so hard they had left grooves on the page beneath. She uncapped her pen and wrote the new date in the margin. The act, both simple and defiant. The record might never appear in an archive or an official briefing, but it was here, alive, in her handwriting. She sat back and closed the cover. The patch rested inside, soft from years of wear, its frayed edges brushing the page. Silence filled the room, not empty but resolute. She understood now that remembrance itself was resistance. The institution could erase her from paper, but it could not erase the endurance carried forward in ink and memory. Weeks later, the story surfaced in fragments. In the mess hall, over trays of food and half-finished conversations, junior pilots whispered about the night a civilian vessel had nearly been lost. They spoke of confusion on the radar screens, of silence from command, and of a voice that had cut through steady and sure. No one knew who it was. The only certainty was that the call sign Shrike had appeared in the system log, glowing for a moment before vanishing again. The whispers grew but never rose above a murmur. Some dismissed it as a glitch, a recycled log entry from years before. Others swore they had heard the tone themselves, unmistakable in its calm. A few dared to scribble the word Shrike on the corner of the mess hall whiteboard, only for it to be erased by morning. The legend persisted anyway, carried from table to table, from shift to shift, half believed and half feared. Lana Hale did not join the conversations. She walked the hallways quietly, her presence passing unnoticed. In the shadowed hangar she moved like a ghost, carrying her notebook tucked under one arm, its cover closed at last. The dog tag at her neck caught the light only once. A brief glint before it vanished back into shadow. No one stopped her. No one asked, though a few glanced her way as if sensing more than they could explain. At night she placed the notebook on a shelf, the frayed squadron patch still pressed inside. She did not need to open it. The names were already written where they could not be erased. She listened to the quiet, hearing echoes that others had long forgotten. The record might never carry her name, but the story lived elsewhere, in the voices of the young who repeated it without knowing the full truth. Shrike had returned, if only for a moment, and that was enough. Legends did not need recognition to endure. They survived in whispers, in shadows, in the fragments passed from one memory to the next, somewhere beyond the reach of official paper. The truth was alive, waiting to be spoken again.